Hey folks, it's your girl Griselda. How you doing? So I was just listening to a podcast. It's one of my favorite podcasts. Um, and one of the things that is disturbing to me, this is a podcast with a Jungian analyst. Okay, so I'm a major Carl Jung person. I encountered him on a deeper level about 13 years ago and found my own thoughts reflected back to me in his analysis of reality, basically. During that time, I was a stripper in New Orleans at the Penthouse Club in the French Quarter. I don't know if you guys have been there, but I was really going through a powerful, deep, dark night of the soul, ego/ego, right? Because that's really an ego loss when that happens. So I think that that's actually more correct. Somebody else mentioned that in my Facebook once, and I was like, yeah, you're actually right. That's what it is. So I love his analysis because it is what we need now more than anything else. I think that modern psychology sucks. Honestly, just to be honest, it's not interested in healing. It's interested in just maintaining the madness enough to get you through your 9 to 5 and your work and to remain institutionalized. You know what I mean? It doesn't offer liberation the way that the analysis of Carl Jung does in Western society, or the indigenous consciousness, which is deeper and more primordial and raw than even Carl Jung, because Carl Jung is still a product and on the edge of our Western hegemony, Western culture. So now that I've just gone on about that, I'm listening to this podcast. I love it. It's one of my favorites. And it was called The Shadow of Aphrodite. Okay, Aphrodite's shadow. They were talking about the curse that comes with beauty, the curse and the shadow of Aphrodite. The way they handled it, in my opinion, what's annoying is that these are people who are supposed to be people who know, right? People who have some capacity for learning. They have dedicated their entire lives to the study of this work of Carl Jung and his analysis and so on. There's this one person on that podcast who is consistently projecting in a very condescending way her own stuff onto the archetype of the wild woman or the beautiful woman. And in this case, the entire conversation was centered around the shadow of Aphrodite, the shadow of beauty, of beautiful women. And ultimately, if they do not cultivate something more than their beauty, like intellect or passion about something else that's outside of the way they look, that their lives wind up in this tragic space. They wind up dying young or, in tragedy. But what was not spoken of was that maybe that's our fault. Maybe that's our society's fault. Our society, or just human beings, the human being, because this has been a constant issue in every civilization, not just today's, this is always a thing. But beauty in and of itself is an aspect of creation. It's an aspect that is pure and deserves a seat at the table of creation because it is part of creation, okay, just like everything else. So Aphrodite in her purest form is not out of balance. What happens, though, is when somebody embodies an Aphrodite essence so powerful, we don't know what to do with it. We don't know what to do with it. Look at Britney Spears, right? Is Britney Spears an example of what happens to Aphrodite if you're not smart and you're just constantly, no, it's the way that energy is used, manipulated, and tended to. And the way that it is used and manipulated and tended to is going to be directly connected to the value system of our culture. How do we mold that? How do we project onto that? Because beauty in its raw essence is, like everything else, part of the alchemy, right? What do we do with this raw essence? So I'm not hearing them talk about that. It's very condescending instead toward the beautiful woman and the curse of the beautiful woman. You know, maybe it's because I was in the sex work industry that I can pick up on these things very quickly. Because, you know, there are so many beautiful women in the world, and I'm not mad at them. You know, what they are doing is what everybody's doing. We're all responding to culture one way or the other. So to become aware of the value system of this culture, to become aware of what that means is important for all of our survival, no matter if we're beautiful or not, you know. But there's a real hatred and resentment of the beautiful woman, okay? There's a real hatred there. And I think that, you know, we have to ask why. They bring up Hera, another Greek archetype, who's the mother, you know, and, you know, there are a lot of instances in Greek mythology where Hera is, you know, but I think projecting her envy of Aphrodite, you know, projecting her envy onto Aphrodite of Aphrodite. If you're into Greek mythology and you know what I'm talking about, but I think Hera has some work to do too. You know what I mean? So I feel like this point of view that they're coming from, and they are Jungian analysts and they're females. My point of bringing this up is that there's so much of this going on instead of the looking at the hands that mold the raw material. They're in a position where they don't question the hands that mold the raw material. They just cannot wait to participate in the continuous demeaning of beauty because they're getting a sort of sadistic high off of it. Not all of these people on this podcast are that like that, but the women that are, and especially one in particular, you know, I think it's dangerous to offer help as an analyst while you are holding these projections within yourself. And this to me is exactly what I mean when I talk about the war happening in the feminine principle, the war between Eve and Lilith, the war between Athena and Medusa, right? These are all so deeply interwoven in our collective Western consciousness. And we need to talk about this. The feminine needs to do some integration herself, you know, herself. And this just pissed me off. And I wanted to mention this because everything is a raw material, okay? And to get back to the root of things is to rediscover or remember the raw materials of things. And it's not the fault of the raw material, no matter what it is. Even if it's ugly versus beauty, if it's, you know, deep darkness versus the highest light, whatever it is, it's all just there to be molded and manifested and alchemized by the hands of civilization, the hands of the individual. And however much that material and whatever is created out of it is going to be a direct reflection of the individual or the civilization's capacity toward or desire for balance, right, and integration. And so we have to remember that. It's kind of like you will know them by their fruit. Well, if motherfuckers tell me that they planted a banana tree and then I see apples growing off of it, I'm like, yeah, well, you know, it's not a banana tree. You know what I mean? So let's look at our culture. We're living in a fishbowl as Westerners, and there's a lot of assumptions that we make as Westerners that are deeply Western-centric, and as a consequence, deeply narcissistic, okay? Just assuming that reality is always from our point of view. So when we think of these archetypes like Aphrodite, Medusa, Athena, we're looking at them in terms of a raw material that are looking for personification in these archetypal characters, and then looking for materialization through us. Remember that. It's not Aphrodite's fault that she's beautiful. It's not, she's here to be beautiful. We don't know what to do with beauty. It's too much. Just like a lot of things are too much for us, right? So just some food for thought, for whatever it's worth. And it's always kind of disappointing to see that a lot of times people who are supposed to know something don't. All right. Thanks for listening to me ramble on. I'd love to hear your thoughts here in the comments. Wishing everybody a really good day.